Newspapers in Australia are reporting on unprecedented bushfires. These bushfires are completely out of control, and they are making conditions in Canberra and Sydney absolutely unlivable for people. It's hard to believe that fires that happen thousands of miles away can have such a huge effect on the quality of life there. Right now in Madrid, they're completing the meetings of COP25. That's the Conference of the Parties, the 25th version. I presented at the very first Conference of the Parties in Kyoto when the Kyoto Protocol was first developed and agreed to by many of the nations of the world. Now you have a Conference of the Parties on climate that has been agreed to by many more nations. In fact, most of the world's emitters, with the notable exception of the United States, which did not participate in a meaningful way in that meeting. 25 years ago, I organized a team of researchers at the World Resources Institute at Harvard University School of Public Health and at the World Health Organization in Geneva and the US EPA. And we put together a team of people who asked a very basic question, and that was the current levels of emissions of fossil fuels. We know we're going to have a certain effect on human health based solely on looking at fine particulates. We asked the question, if you could look at what the current concentrations were in the air from the emissions being produced by burning fossil fuels in 1997, that's business as usual. If you could say, how much are we producing now in 1997, and how much less could we produce if we implemented some very basic policies to reduce greenhouse gases? We put together teams who looked at the activities of different sectors, such as industry, transportation, and residential facilities and manufacturing. And we asked, what could they do under a realistic scenario of reducing emissions? And we calculated if the emissions went down, then the concentrations in the air would go down, and then the deaths from particulate air pollution would decline, as well as the considerable damage that happens from chronic bronchitis, which can be a disabling disease and causes a lot of people to lose work for many, many days. And we did a very complicated system of modeling of all of that information, looking at the information developed by the Harvard University researchers, as well as the EPA experts in modeling and emissions concentration. We concluded in 1997 and published in The Lancet in the first rapid response publication they ever published, that if people were to continue to burn fossil fuels with no reduction in emissions, there would be 8 million avoidable deaths by 2020. It's almost 2020. And when we did our analysis, we did not even consider the possibility of these bushfires. We did not even consider the possibilities of the drought and the heat and the other problems that we now have, nor did we consider the problems of the unprecedented superstorms that are affecting the world, summer and winter. In the winter, you have enormous snows in the mountains and heavy rains. And in the summer, you have hurricanes and tornadoes hitting places that have never hit before. So our calculation did not look into that at all. We simply asked the question, how many deaths could be avoidable if we just reduced fossil fuels a small amount? Now, the good news is that some regions of the planet were able to reduce those emissions, sometimes just opportunistically, because the merger of East and West Germany, for example, West Germany is pretty high emitter, East Germany had very little industry, and by combining the two, you were able to actually get a benefit for the total. There was a benefit in England because of the discovery in the North Sea of natural gas, which allowed England to make a more radical switch from burning as much coal as they did before. And there were experiments confirming this in certain areas of Ireland where the coal burning stopped quickly. There was actually an improvement in the death rate from heart attacks. So we could see measurable effects. But unfortunately, it is now 25 years later. We have the COP25. We have the United States, which is no longer the world's largest emitter. That's role now is taken by China. But what we do have is a failure of leadership, a failure of political leadership to do as much as can be done. But having said that, the good news that did come out of COP is that there has been some progress, particularly in the fact that most industrial nations of the world no longer debate whether or not there's something going on called climate change. Most scientists in the world do not debate that either. And hopefully when the United States regains a more rational basis to its policy, we'll continue to make more progress on that front.